We are the Chisholm Trail Outdoor Museum blacksmiths. Welcome to our shop.
Yeah. Take it all the way down. Alright, so first what we'll do is I guess we'll go through the tools and material that we've got. Some of this stuff that I've made and others we just pick up here and there. So first I guess would be the copper. It's just a copper sheet. It was scrap whenever I got it, and I'll keep cutting the pattern out. This is the pattern for the rose. I actually printed the pattern off online, and then I trace it out onto the copper, cut it out with tin snips. So to trace it onto the copper, I just took a piece of welding rod and sharpened the end of it so that I can scratch the outline of the pattern onto the copper, cut that out, and then we texture it and all of that. So then we have roughly, let's see, about 12 inches of 1/4 inch round bar that we use for the stem. Then we'll make 2 leaves to go onto it after that. Most of my texturing I do with a little like rock hammer, I guess. Just the back side of that I've polished up. I weld the 2 leaves on there, but you'll see all of that here in a few minutes. So I'll get started on tracing this out. You just lay this on here. Okay, I don't know if you can see that real well, but it leaves a mark there for the largest part of the pattern. And then I'll go through individually, mark all these out, and then we'll start cutting those. Now, hopefully you can see that all of the pattern pieces are, I don't know if you can tell that on there, but they're all drawn out on here, and I just have to cut those out now. I like to keep my pattern all together, so I just drilled holes in them to put a large key ring through there so that I can keep all of them together, and then I don't lose any of the pieces from the pattern. I'm sure there's a much better way or more efficient way to cut these pieces out, but this is what I have, so this is how I'm gonna do it. Now, the best way that I've found with these particular tin snips is to go through and do all of, I guess, the right-handed curves first. So I'll go down to the next petal and cut that same curve out, following the line, and then on to the next. So then you end up with this, with all of the one side of the petals cut, and then I go back around and start from the other direction. And then you end up with this. So we repeat that for each individual piece, and we'll work on what comes next. There's the final piece cut. What we'll do now, we'll get a center punch because we're going to need a 1/4 inch hole in the center of every one of these. We'll go ahead and make our marks. You don't have to be super accurate with it because it's a flower, right? We'll drill our holes in there and we can start to clean them up. Okay. So we're just going to hold on to these with a pair of vice grips. Probably won't hear anything with this thing on, but we're just going to drill holes in all of them. Now you could punch holes in these if you wanted to. It's just as easy to drill holes in them. I don't see why not. And then we will clean these. We'll get to texturing them after that. Now what we'll do is we'll put some salt in here, like so. Vinegar. I want to put enough vinegar to cover everything. You can see that's already starting to take the tarnish off of there. So we'll leave that in there for a little bit. The backs of those things are pretty rough, but that'll brighten them up, and we'll work on the rest of it. Alright, I went ahead and let it sit for 20 minutes in here because the back side, that's actually mostly glue, I guess. It was a sheet of copper glued to a piece of particle board. So I let it sit long enough to try and loosen that stuff up. I'll take the rest off with a wire brush, but we'll pour this out and then put it in a solution of water and baking soda to neutralize the acid. Then we'll wire brush everything and start texturing. I'm going to put enough water in here to cover up the blanks. I just dump some baking soda in there. And that will help to neutralize the acid. We'll rinse these off and start cleaning them. We're going to work on the texture first. Each one of them takes basically the same texture. So we're going to use the back side of this hammer. And we're going to give that texture to each one of the petals on all of these, except for this one. They'll be done at kind of an angle, but I'll show you how those are done too. So we'll just keep going around in line with the center, just straight back and forth like this, so that every petal has a line that goes from one end, from the tip of the petal down this way, and they're all in line on both the petals. So we do that same thing to the last one. And that gives you that. You just do that all the way around on all of the rest of them, and I'll show you how to do this piece in a second. And there's the last piece done, and you can see how all the lines are leading from the tip of the pedal back to the center. You don't have to do the center because that's the part where the bud will be, and all of it's riveted together there. This one, I usually start on the back side with a rounded fuller. Make a line in the center. And that gives you that little bitty pronounced line there in the middle. And these little lines here, I do at an angle, kind of 45, I guess, to that line. And that gives me this little kind of pattern here. And then we'll hit the edges of that a little bit with the bandsaw just to make little notches so it's kind of serrated, I guess. And but that's how we do this part. So I'll finish that up, and then we'll move on to and that gives us all the little serrated edges, I guess, on our leaves for the bottom of the bud. Now this part's going to be kind of hard to see and impossible to hear, but I like to take the each one of these and go through the middles of where the slits are, and then clean these up all the way around with a worn 120 grit belt, and that smooths out the edges so that there's no rough stuff before we go to the wire wheel. And that smooths out the edges. It's in much better shape. So I'll do each one of these and then go to the wire brush after that. We'll knock off any burrs caused by the belt sander. We're just going to clean these up, knock all the stuff off the backs of them, all of this weird green glue stuff, and then we have more to do. You probably won't have to do this if you get decent material. Like I said, this was just scrap for me. This part takes the longest, but it has nice results. Now, if you're working on something that's clean like this, it'll take a lot less time to make it look good. See, that part shines up in no time. You could even leave it like this if you wanted to. So that part's up to you, really. Alright, now all I'm doing here is using that same worn 120 grit belt to knock the rust off of this, make it shiny, and then we'll texture it. There we go. Now you could use sandpaper or a 1x30. I've used a 1x30 for years, so you don't have to have a 2x72. This one is just homemade, probably why it's so loud. But now we'll go to texturing this and go from there. So for texturing, I just use the round side of my hammer, roll the rod, just keep your hammer still. And it gives you kind of a, there we go. It gives you kind of a textured bar. Instead of just being smooth and round, it has some sort of feeling to it, more character, I guess. So you continue to do that all the way down. And now that is textured. So what we'll do is around here, probably ½ an inch down from the end of the bar, we're going to weld with the MIG welder. We're going to weld a big ball right across here all the way around to make kind of the bud of the flower. I suppose if you were ambitious, you could probably forge weld a collar on there and give yourself enough material, but you know, for the sake of speed and ease, we just weld a ball there and texture it with a texture hammer so that it doesn't look like just a MIG weld. And then we go from there. I don't have one of those fancy welding lenses for my phone, so I'm going to start welding here. We'll rotate and keep doing that until we get a decent sized ball on the end there. Okay, so all we're going to do now is just texture this real quick. So this hammer has little slits we made in it with a angle grinder, which gives us kind of a funny little color or texture there. Then we'll stick this in there like so. And we start taking our flower pieces, putting them over top. You can use like a hollow punch or anything. I've got an old kind of screwdriver that has a socket end on it, and I can just take that and give it a little tap there, and that knocks down each individual piece. You don't have to worry about how the arrangement is yet. Worry about that once you get it all started to rivet it together. Once it's riveted, it pretty much stays there. Okay, now that's the whole thing together. This little piece right here that sticks up, we can cold rivet that, and that will hold the whole thing together. It's still loose enough now that I can move the petals in whatever orientation I want them. So I want them kind of offset to each other so that they're not all just right on top. more you rivet that down, the harder it's going to be to adjust. So you don't want to go too far. Or you'll have the whole thing out of whack, which would be unfortunate. Once you get it to a point where you're happy with it, lock everything down. It doesn't move anymore. And you end up with this. Kind of a hodgepodge of stuff. And then we'll work on bending all of these into place first so it actually looks like a rose. Then we will make the leaves that go on the end of it. We're almost done. Now for this, you really need a pair of needle nose pliers. And we'll get the first set of leaves. You want to kind of round these like so, and you push them up like that. So you do the same thing with the next one. And push that up. Now the third one on the first set, we want to go behind this one, like underneath, and then over this one, so you can continue kind of a spiral look, I guess. So you pull that one back just a little, push that one in. And then you have the center part of your bud. And you keep doing that all the way down. When we get to the third one, the third set, that's when we'll start to fold over the edge. Just a little bit on the third one, a little more on the fourth one, and a little more than that on the fifth one. Okay. Now, we only want to go down to about the top of the next row. So we don't want to bend half of the petal down. So we just go down to about the top of the row before that and start opening this up just a little. You don't want to go all the way open. I suppose you could go a little further and that would give you a bigger flower if that's what you were looking for. But that's kind of all you want right there with this first row. And then we continue that around. And the next row, you'll bend even further than that because it's longer. And you want to kind of maintain the same height, I guess, or facial plane, maybe. I don't know what you would call that. And that's really all you want to do to that row. Now, if you end up with a section that's loose like that, you can get a punch. Get a center punch or round punch or something, and you can manipulate that rivet in the center, and that'll tighten everything up. But I would probably wait until you're done forming the rows before you do that, because you may loosen it up a little by twisting everything. So we'll do that once we get to the end of the rows. Okay, now because most of these are longer, we go further down to start bending these out. Now, it may be a good idea to smooth out the edges of your needle nose so they don't leave little marks, but some of these petals are not going to be as long as the others. That will depend on how far they got ground down whenever you were cleaning them, how deep the cuts are on the bottom when they get folded up, and how well centered your center punch is. So if they're not as long, just don't bend them as deeply as you did the other ones, so that they still maintain that same kind of level. And as you get to the bigger petals, they're much easier to bend and manipulate to get where you need them. Now, if you choose, you can leave those like that, or you can bend those over to meet the same plane as the other ones, which is what I normally do. So, the more you tinker with that, the more it looks like a rose. So what we'll do now is we'll tap down that rivet, get it tightened up a little bit so that we don't have anything that spins, and then we can work on making leaves. Now, I don't know that I would recommend that you light your forge for 2 leaves, but so maybe whenever you go to making these things, make 6 or 8 leaves at a time. That way you can justify spending the time it takes to light your forge. Unless you got a propane forge, I guess that's not so bad. Alright, so I'm going to use the same 1/4 inch round bar that I started with. This way I don't have to use other material or get different new material. I can just use the same 1/4 inch round bar. I square it off so that it's easier to make the leaf, but it's just 1/4 inch hot rolled round bar. We start by making a point, 2-sided taper. That's the first part of our leaf. Mark down the shoulder. And you draw that out away for the stem. I usually use about the length of that there so that I can work it around here. Now we'll round off the stem before we make the leaf. Now we have a nice round stem. We'll start on the leaf. So that's sort of the shape that we're going for there. Now we'll heat that up and then shape it so it looks more like a leaf. Give it a little life. We're just going to cut at the end of each one of these lines. There's 5 lines on each side, so we'll do 10 cuts. Like that. And then we'll use the buffing wheel to clean that up, or not the buffing wheel, the Scotch-Brite belt on the belt sander. And that's what that looks like whenever we're done with that. And we'll cut it off right here and then make another one for the other side of the flower. So just kind of repeat this same process over again. Now that we have our 2 leaves, we'll weld those onto the stem. One step closer to done. I usually try to put a big enough bead on here that I can grind it down to kind of form it so it looks like it's sort of supposed to be there, one piece. That should be the remainder of the welding. Now I will grind this down to where it looks like it's all one piece, supposed to be there. Then we'll heat it up, move the leaves, tilt the flour a little, and clear coat if you like, and we'll be done. Then I just go through and make a couple little heat spots on here so that it has a nice blue color. Yeah, we should probably cool that off. The only thing left is to bend these into place. Usually you can just kind of bend them around something. And then roll them back up a little bit. You can do it all with the needle nose if you want. And there you are, one copper and steel rose. Now I would clear coat this. Currently I'm using just a lacquer, a spray lacquer, Rust-Oleum or something. As I understand it, there is a product out there, I think it's called Everbright, that's specifically for copper. So it may keep the copper brighter for longer, and then it doesn't like tarnish or anything like that. But the clear lacquer works for what I need it to. But there you go. It currently takes me a couple, probably 3 hours or so to make one of these right now. Admittedly, quite a bit of time goes into cleaning the copper. So if you start off with cleaner material, this should take a lot less time to do. There you are, one rose.